Because the world is just a bunch of people milling around on a rock, hurtling through space at 67,000 miles per hour, vaguely following some rules suggested by the structures they happen to be born into.
Bing, bing, bing. Bing, 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 bing. Bing, bing, bing. I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets
gross.
the people going.
In the previous video, I suggested happiness, or what I prefer to call satisfaction, was obtained through a balanced triangulation of three dimensions of social life: who I am, how life is, and what I want. If you can bring your wants into alignment with what life can be reasonably expected to provide, you'll be happy. The inverse is also true. Unhappiness, or what I prefer to call frustration, is the distance between your expectations and reality. Last video, I gave an outline of how to know yourself. In this video, I want to talk about how life is. The world is composed of two elements: people and structures. You can't exist in the world without interacting with people, nor can you escape a whole series of structures that have been built up over time and give rules, order, and meaning to whatever society you find yourself in. By structures, I'm talking about institutions like schools, the law, police, and corporations, rules like which side of the road to drive on, or norms like which side of the sidewalk to walk on, or the customary language spoken wherever you live. The point is, although you're in principle a free agent, in practice you're constrained by a whole host of things around you. Unless you have at least a basic comprehension of the structures that exist in the society you inhabit and how those structures function and how they impact upon individuals, there's no way you'll be able to form an assessment of what you can reasonably expect to get from this life. Aside from structures, the world is constituted by other people. As a general rule, you can't get anything you want unless some other person or other people agree. Think about this another way. If everyone in society is adamant you won't get something, there's almost no chance you will. Conversely, if everyone supports your desire to get something, most likely you've already got it. This is not a description of fans or haters. This is a description of the reality of gatekeeping, nepotism, and the absolute necessity of interpersonal connections. Think about an aspiring Olympic athlete. If the junior swimming school coach or your parents didn't agree with your desire to pursue this aspiration, there's no way it can or will happen. On the other hand, every successful person has a battalion of other human beings that agreed to support their wants and desires and enabled those possibilities. At the end of the day, there's no such thing as a self-made person. It's impossible to be self-made. Every person that has ever achieved anything has had some other people somewhere along the way that agreed and said yes to their aspiration. Again, this is not an objection to the idea of perseverance. I'm not saying that if things are hard and people say no, you should give up. Instead, what I'm saying is that you should continue to look for that person that will say yes and agree to your aspirations. Your success will come when you've found that person or those people that agree. I guess what I'm doing is I'm reorienting the emphasis somewhat. Imagine you're a struggling musician. There are two ways to think about how to proceed. The first is to just grind away and keep making music and keep getting better and better at songwriting. Okay, fine. Now what? What do you do with all that great music? The other way to look at the situation, what I'm suggesting, is that your challenge really is to find people who do agree that you should be a songwriter, insofar as they want to hear your music. Now, it might be that to have the people you find agree you should be a songwriter requires you to get better at it. But maybe not. I mean, there are plenty of successful and terrible musicians. However, what do all successful musicians have in common? It's not how good they are, it's that somewhere, somehow, there are people who agree with the proposition that they should be a musician. The point is, the world is constituted by people, and getting people to agree and say yes to your wants is absolutely fundamental. In fact, critically necessary to your being able to obtain them. In other words, the task of, quote, bringing your wants into alignment with what life can reasonably be expected to provide is to a large extent coextensive with, quote, getting some person or people to agree with your wants. Therefore, part of the formula for happiness involves the task of getting people to agree that your wants are reasonable. If no one in the world agrees your wants are reasonable, not only will you be miserable because of the constant negativity, but you won't be able to achieve any of your goals, because standing in every doorway and on every threshold is a person saying no. Let's return to structures for a moment. The structures, that is to say, the institutions, norms, and customs of life, collectively constituting the rules of the game. I don't want to spend too much time on this, since the rules of the game are subtly or drastically different depending on where you're playing your game. The bottom line, though, is try to figure out the rules of the game and play by them or according to their spirit. The worst thing that you can do, which lots of people do, is that they think the rules of the game don't apply to them, or they can do it their own way. For most people, this kind of attitude is a complete disaster. The only kinds of people that can get away with this kind of inefficiency are those that have money, crazy charisma, or some other undeniable natural talent. For ordinary people, playing by the rules of the game is the best way to go. Renegades that succeed don't succeed because they ignore the rules. They succeed despite ignoring them because of money, charisma, or talent. But we're talking about a fraction of a percent of all the people in the world that are like that. For the vast majority, what is far more effective is to figure out what is expected, what the people who are already succeeding in a given situation are doing, and just do that. Behave like them, act like them, and relate like them in the situation. It's just exponentially easier that way. People will respond better to you, be more comfortable with you, and want to help you and see your wants fulfilled. In other words, figuring out the rules of the game, understanding them, and then playing by them is a fast track to, quote, getting some person or people to agree with your wants. The key challenge we discussed a moment ago. Okay, so that raises the question of how to figure out the rules of the game. How do you figure out how the institutions, norms, and customs of life work? The first thing is careful, quiet observation. When you enter a new situation, have a look around and carefully study and assess how things work. Ask yourself who gets what, when, and how. If you can figure out who gets what, when, and how, you can try and work out what they are doing to achieve this, or the nature of the relationship between the people who receive and those that provide. The worst thing you can do in a new situation is assume you know the rules of the game, to rush in based on these assumptions and act according to your preconceived notions. Maybe you'll fluke it and be right. Chances are, though, you'll pit people's back up, have them form an unpleasant opinion of you, and make it just one bit harder to, quote, get them to agree with your wants. The last thing I want to raise concerning how the world is the question of expectations, in its most general sense. What can or should a person expect of this life? Another way of asking this question is, what does this life owe you? 0, a big fat donut. Nothing. The world owes you nothing, and you can therefore expect nothing from this world. Why? Because the world is just a bunch of people milling around on a rock, hurtling through space at 67,000 miles per hour, vaguely following some rules suggested by the structures they happen to be born into. What exactly in that equation suggests you're owed any of your wants or desires? Now, it's possible that through the course of your life, you'll achieve some, perhaps even all of your wants. It is, in fact, entirely possible that you'll, quote, bring your wants into alignment with what life can reasonably be expected to provide. I mean, that's what these videos are about. But that process, that journey of alignment, starts from 0. You're not owed any kind of fast track or slipstream. Maybe you think, or someone you know, already has one of these slipstreams. Maybe they were born to rich parents, or in a fantastic supportive family, or with an extremely high IQ. Despite there being no clear connection between happiness and any of those things, They were provided by random chance. No one earns parents, family, or an IQ. And they certainly weren't owed, or these things weren't owed to anyone before they were born. The world owes you absolutely nothing. So the challenge of happiness, the journey to bring your wants into alignment with what life can reasonably provide, begins from the basement level for everyone. The longer it takes someone to step out of their tower or off their pedestal and feel the earth underneath their feet, the longer the journey to satisfaction is delayed. In the next video, I'll discuss how to bring your wants into alignment with what can reasonably be expected of this life. This involves understanding your wants, establishing the right kinds of wants, and rejecting toxic and self-destructive ones.